Hello again. I come to you today with a little bit of a cold, so I may sound a little weird. I may do a little bit of coughing. I may do a little bit of sneezing, if we're lucky. And I may be a little bit low energy. The last one was also a bit low energy, but for different reasons. So yeah, just wanted to get that on the table. Today, what I wanted to talk about is I don't know, just kind of a handful of interrelated topics that I felt like I wanted to kind of try to, to connect the dots a bit and express, why I'm thinking about them and how they relate to each other. So basically what I want to talk about is, it's about Daoism and authenticity and identity and desire. So those are a handful of things that we're going to take a look at today. So, a couple years ago, I was introduced to one of the two major texts of Daoism, which is called the Zhuangzi. So the Zhuangzi is usually kind of the second book reference when it comes to Daoism, the first being the Tao Te Ching, which is what I have right here. I have a copy of the Zhuangzi, which is one of my most prized possessions, and I don't know where it is right now. But I'm pretty sure it's safe somewhere. But yeah, it's kind of a Taoist thing to just not know where some of your most important objects are. Maybe. I guess you can make an argument that mostly anything is Taoist in some way. Like, that's just kind of how it is. But yeah, anyway, so there's Zhuangzi and there's the Tao Te Ching. So my introduction was to Zhuangzi, which is usually the second read because it references Lao Tzu and the Tao Te Ching a lot. Excuse me. And a lot of people would argue that you don't really need to argue it. It's pretty clear in the text that like a lot of what Zhuangzi is kind of just taking a lot of the ideas and the conclusions of the Tao Te Ching and kind of just commenting on them and expanding on them. But there's a big difference between the general format of Tao Te Ching and Zhuangzi, which is Tao Te Ching is a lot more kind of small bits of wisdom, of ancient Chinese wisdom, that have some core themes and ideas that kind of tie it all together. So this is the case for both of them to varying degrees, but like Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi, Lao Tzu may have never actually existed at all. Zhuangzi, I'm pretty sure, is kind of like Jesus, where it's like he definitely existed, or he definitely, there was someone that this character or this idea is based on, but it may not be the literal person that wrote this or died on a cross for us, that kind of thing. But yeah, so the way that this specific translation of Tao Te Ching kind of explains it is, it's basically the idea, like, imagine if there was an internet forum that was kind of formed around a specific philosophy or kind of a specific framework of analysis or that kind of thing. And so this forum has a bunch of kind of short posts about people just kind of throwing out their ideas as they relate to this thing. So you can think of the Tao Te Ching as something like that from ancient China, where some people got together and took all those forum posts, put them together, organized them in a way that kind of makes sense, going from concept to concept and making somewhat of a linear kind of philosophical text. But really it is a bunch of discrete individual kind of bits of wisdom. And it's great. Zhuangzi is a lot more focused and simultaneously a lot less focused, which is, again, a very Taoist thing to just be contradictory like that. But whereas Tao Te Ching is a lot of tiny bits of wisdom, and a little bit of humor. Zhuangzi is, in some ways, you could literally describe it as a book of jokes, but they're like kind of. Even this is maybe a little bit of a controversial statement, but it's kind of a book of jokes, a book of philosophical jokes with, like I said, like a common philosophical core. Yeah. So it's a book of jokes. It's a book of little stories. And the wisdom comes from, most of the time, it actually comes from the humor. The joke itself has some philosophical implication. It has I'll give an example. So there's a story about a guy who's born with no eyes, no nose, no mouth, no ears, and the people around him are freaking out. He's just vibing. He's just living his life of not having any senses or holes in his head. But then the people around him are like, "There's something wrong here. We got to fix this. This guy's got this big problem." And so they drill holes in order to create eyes, nose, and a mouth, and of course that kills him. So there's an example of like kind of a joke, a little like jokey story that's making a philosophical point about like forcing something that is not I gotta think about this for a sec. Forcing something that is not authentically happening on its own, if that makes sense. Something like that. Or forcing an identity, or forcing our individual subjective values onto something that does not apply. Okay, I don't know. There's ways that you can interpret that story, but that's just an example. The whole point of it is just to give you an example. So that's an example. Anyway, so like Daoism, right, and authenticity, kind of like I'm kind of getting to the point. There's this character. I can't remember the character's name, but the character without eyes, nose, mouth, that kind of thing. This is an example of someone living authentically by him just being, and then the intrusion of someone trying to destroy that authenticity to make them fit better into society, for example. And this is a pretty common theme in Zhuangzi, is kind of this basic idea that like society has all these ideas about how things should be and what should happen and who should do what and when and why, and kind of just saying, well, not even saying, more just pointing out the absurdity of all of these things. It points out the absurdity to make the philosophical point that the way, which Dao, the word Dao, that's what that means, is way, essentially. The way of doing life, the way of conducting yourself in life, is not set. In fact, there are some translations of the first part of the Tao Te Ching, which is probably the most quoted part of the Tao Te Ching, which is the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. And so that's a big part of it. And that kind of segues to the next important thing, which is kind of this general skepticism of language. So specifically, what it's saying is the Tao, the way. If you were to name it, if you were to describe a way, then it immediately can be identified as not the way, because the eternal way is not the way that can be named. And essentially what this means is that the Tao, this central spiritual figure of Taoism, clearly, because it's in the name, it comes from, by nature, being ultimately in flux, if that makes sense. That the definition to like, in order to have any grasp, for example, on what this is to not have any grasp on it at all. Because the best way to understand it is to understand it as something that cannot be understood, if that makes really any sense. But the idea of it is that it's this central dynamic force that is at the center of nature and at the center of everything. But that, yeah. Lao Tzu kind of comments in the entire Tao Te Ching in the same way that I am right now, by undercutting everything he says by saying, me using words right now is completely inadequate to get you to understand what this is. It's kind of something that you have to experience for yourself. But we can try, I guess, is kind of it's not a refusal of language as much as it is a skepticism of language to be able to describe, well, the Tao in like primarily, but also just anything in general. And that's because basically anything and everything is the Tao, and the Tao is everything, blah, 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 blah. So where this comes to like authenticity, right, is actually I'd like to read. Let's go ahead and read a little passage here. I think it's the first passage of Tao Te Ching here, and I think it really sets the stage so well because it just describes exactly everything you need to know about Taoism, really, just in this first passage here. Any course can be taken as the right course to take, but no course like that can be the course taken always. Any name can be named to determine what is or should be, but no name like that can be what determines them always. Nameless, undetermined, any beginning of 10,000 things, determined with a name, the mother of the 10,000 things. Thus is desirelessness always maintained, enabling a view of the mystery in each of them and all. And thus is desire always maintained, enabling a view of just what it is that each of them strives and cries for. These two emerge together as one, but when named are determined as different. Oh shit. Okay, and then the last little bit here. Their oneness is something truly obscure, more obscure than obscure, obscuring even obscurity. A gateway into the manifold mysteries of each of them and all. I really love that passage. So, yeah, I think that part about desire and desirelessness is really the interesting and important thing, right? Because desirelessness in order to view the mystery. So this idea that you have to be void of desire in order to view the mystery. So I think my interpretation of this is when it's talking about the mystery, it's talking about existence, which is just one big ass mystery. And so desire is a thing that draws you towards understanding. And the thing about mysteries, and a mystery like this, is that should you desire to understand it, you are preventing yourself from simply viewing it, to just take it in. And so that desirelessness, I would kind of argue, for example, would be like going into nature. Like, nature is this thing that doesn't have any particular answers for you. It is just what is and has always been. And so when you look at nature, you know, there's some desire to understand it, and we can gain some understanding of it, obviously, through science and these kinds of things. But we can never truly understand it in its entirety, and what it is and its purpose and that kind of thing. So in order to not put on the blinders and to just take it in for what it is, we have to cast away that desire to understand it. But what this text also says is that, in my words, I would say, you also need to have desire in order to do anything. Because if you're completely desireless, then what reason do you have to understand or do anything? Which is, you won't. So, and then it says, we add names to these things. We call this desire, and we call this other thing desirelessness. But what Lao-Tzu, I think, is essentially saying is that the way, if you will, is to hold both of these things at once, and that only language is what separates these things, desirelessness and desire. When in reality, or not in reality, but like in, what's what I'm looking for, like ultimately, these are the same thing. And that's how you kind of get this general theme through the Tao Te Ching that manifests in many different ways, but it's this idea of like primary, secondary things or opposing things, but particularly things that are defined by not being the other thing. And so this is kind of a general idea of Taoism, which is that, again, like this kind of skepticism of language to, well, I guess the skepticism of language to be the primary or sole means of understanding. If that makes sense. I'm kind of just rambling, I think, at this point, because I haven't gotten to the actual point that I want to make. So, the point that I want to make is that, well, there's all these contradictions, right? Of these oppositions. So, like desire, desirelessness, for example, that Lao-Tzu would argue is actually one, and then by using our brains and trying to give them names, we divide them and say that they're different, but they're actually the same thing. And same thing that goes with the Tao itself, right? If you were to name it, then it would be a fixed thing. And you can't fix it because it is not something that is stable like that. It's not something that stays the same ever. And then when you kind of start to think about it more and you start to read these things and let it kind of gestate in your brain, you start to realize that everything is like this. You realize that your identity, for example, is like this, and the identity of the people around you, and the systems that govern our lives, and nature, of course. All of these things are constantly in flux. Yet, as humans, we love to identify things and put things in boxes. We say this is this and this is this. And the problem is that can only work for so long, because when you assign the name to something and then it changes, is it what you assign that name to anymore? It's a great question. So I guess getting to my ultimate point, in life, there are these times that happen. Should it be a breakup, or a pandemic, or death in the family, or job loss, loss of lots of things, passion. Yeah, there are these moments that happen periodically throughout your life where that name that you gave yourself, or that you have either gave yourself or have been given, you start to wonder what it is and what it means, right? Because something has changed. And so us in our, especially in the West, in our mindset of, I am Micah, and now there's this word that is used to identify me. But then that thing that I'm identifying has changed. So is the word still adequate to describe what it is? And this, I think, is at the core of what true authenticity is, that I think is something that we're going to have a really hard time with, our generation and the younger generation. I don't know if I'm a Zoomer or millennial. I guess I'm a Zillennial or whatever. Doesn't matter. It's all bullshit. We're putting names to things that change, right? But this is something that I think that we struggle with now, and we will continue to struggle with increasingly over time, which is, how do we be authentic when not only do we have this name and do we have these buckets that we're put into, and then we change, and then there's this disconnect. We're trying to put a square peg in a round hole, And a big part, so we already have that. We've had that for a long time in human society, but now we have social media where you create, and dating apps, fucking hate this shit. Dating apps where you are given some pictures and some prompts to name who you are, in a sense. And then we have clustering algorithms that identify your behavior and pay attention to what you're doing on social media, on the internet and stuff, and then put you into boxes that way. And they say, Mike is a gamer, They say, Micah, his favorite thing is Final Fantasy VII. And, that kind of thing. And, yeah. And so, I went through one of these periods during the pandemic where I started to wonder what Micah is. And even saying it now, it feels very strange to say your own name. I don't know, maybe it's a good exercise, a good Taoist exercise to say your name out loud and feel how weird it is. Yeah, I went through this period of well, who is Micah? And why does it not align with what I, at one point, so securely defined as Micah? And you really have to struggle in that space of not knowing. And I think becoming read on Daoism helped a lot, because if I could use the inadequate technology of language to describe my findings or describe my conclusions, it's that in order to be completely authentic, you cannot ask this question. When you ask the question, it dooms your ability to be authentic. When you ask the question, who is Micah? Who am I? Because to answer this question is to try to fix something that is in its best form, in its spiritually ideal form, is something that is inherently dynamic and changes from moment to moment. There's a bit of there's an interpretation of Zhuangzi, I think it's Zhuangzi, of some of the stories that kind of, in order to describe what he's talking about, this analogy is given of playfulness, right? Play is a big thing, I think, in Zhuangzi. And in particular, when it relates to identity, that the best way that you can be authentic I'll leave it at that. The best way that you can be authentic, the easiest way to be authentic, is to play with identity as a child does. So, for example, a child or a group of children might get together and be like, "Now we're cowboys," and then they take on that identity for 30 minutes or whatever, and they say that was fun, and then they go about their day, and they're no longer a cowboy, or now I'm a spaceman, you know. So this is what is interpreted to be kind of Zhuangzi's recommendation about identity, is that to recognize that to try to fix an identity is dooming yourself from being authentic. And the best way to be authentic is to do authentic pretending, to take on identities and cast them away as quickly as they arrived. And what happens from that is that you just, with no intention, stumble upon who you are in any moment. And whatever that is cannot be described in words. It cannot be, captured and put onto a dating app. But you can feel it. And this ties together so much of, especially Zhuangzi, but so much of Taoism, which is that trying itself in any regard, whether it's trying to fix something to an identity, or if it's trying to, from another story, butcher an ox, for example, that the most effective way of achieving the thing that you're trying to do is to stop trying to do that thing. Because it should come from the Tao, if you will. It should come from some internal force that, when you just let it be and let it do what it does, will naturally push you to what is right for you, or what is correct. So it's a lot about like flow, which again, bringing it back to play. I mean, it's so simple, but when you're playing, you're not stressing about playing correctly, right? No, I mean, I guess like you want to talk about like video games and that kind of thing. That can be a whole different story. But even in that regard, right? Like when someone is playing League of Legends, for example, in a highly competitive tournament, and the stakes are very high, chances are the best players on those League of Legends teams are players that are so well practiced and so comfortable that in that moment there really is not an ounce of effort being given, or that there's no, I don't know if that's exactly correct. There's no intentional effort being given. It is a natural flow state that comes from the comfort in your ability to execute this thing. So it is still play, but the point is that even a, something that is maybe a technically very difficult thing, like winning a League of Legends tournament, or casually playing, I don't know, everything, the video game Everything, which is probably not a good reference because not a lot of people know what it is, but check it out. Just look up Everything on Steam or PlayStation. It's actually a video game about Taoism. So, but it's a sandbox. Like there's no goal, right? So those things, right now, because we put names to them, we say this is competitive video gaming, and this is a sandbox art game. Whereas I would look at that and I would say, perhaps not. Perhaps they're actually exactly the same, because the optimal experience for someone who is trying to achieve something difficult, like winning that League of Legends tournament, what's going on in their brain is essentially the same as what's going on for someone who's playing, I'll give a better example, Minecraft. So like a sandbox, like chill game, right? What's going on in their mind is the same thing, which is that it's really nothing. It's that they have emptied their mind and allowed their intuition to take over. And so in both situations, you are playing, but one of those things is actually a technically very difficult thing to achieve. But it's achieved through this play. And so I think being authentic in knowing who you are is exactly the same idea, right? It's if there is an ounce of intentional effort to discover, to do self-discovery, you fucked it. It's over. Because that's not how these things work. The way that it works is through what some Taoist scholars would say in English as effortless action, or doing non-doing. And as a spiritual practice, recognizing that this doing, non-doing is a spiritual state, the state of flow. This is you connecting with the Tao, the thing that is inherent in everything, the kind of unifying force at the center of the universe. Sorry, I get giddy when I talk about this, because it's a beautiful philosophy. But I think that was a very disjointed and like I said, improvised, and I emptied my mind and intuitively spoke some words at you. And I think that pretty much sums up what I wanted to say in this video. So I won't let it go any longer, but I will play a song. Oh, we're recording. Shit. Okay. I actually don't know what song we're going to play. Okay, okay. Concord flies in my room, tears the house to shreds, defines the night as such, a home for us, stick insects, and leaves no trace of love in any market town that we intersect. I died like 15 times. The dark blue stem brings me to their breast. And I'm feeling kinda normal with a packed lunch. Train rides don't hurt much these days. We're all working on ourselves and we're praying the rest don't mind how much we've changed. So if you see me looking strange with a fresh style, I'm still not feeling that and soft focus all around you. You can't see the football game on my dad's sofa. We are still, and we never look at our phones anymore. I can't think of anything better. Pick your hair off my sweater and drown in me like a boyfriend jeans. Oh, I haven't felt this way in like ever. I am the convo, you are the weather. And the clamp is a cracked smile cheek, and it tortures me. Your hair off my sweater and drown in me like a boyfriend jeans. Though I haven't felt this way in like ever. I am the convo, you are the weather. The clamp is a cracked smile cheek, and it tore